All right. Well, welcome the in-persons and Tony et al. My name is Glenn Acom. I'm part of the ReMod Squad. Liz has it in echo. And there's a very distinguished group of us trying to do the best we can to take a look at the building and grounds, and especially this one happens to be a discussion of the courtyard. So this is the group. I think I've got everybody listed. We looked specifically at the courtyard, especially at drainage, the topography, vegetation, the uses, which are fairly simple, but also circulation, the ease, and some of the issues. We've done a couple of recent things, one of which is getting a new topo survey, which will tell us from the comparison to the old topo survey what has changed, and that will be critical as we look to make drainage improvements to make sure we're getting positive drainage, water going downhill, and getting that into the stormwater ponds that are right along Fifth. So this was a photo that was discovered. Carol, I don't know if you found it or someone. This is a 1990 photo or thereabouts as the sanctuary was begun. And we can see the laurel oak, which is the large laurel oak that we have right now in front of the sanctuary. So our guess is it's at least 50 years old, because that certainly looks like could easily be 20 years, could be even more. And much has changed. The congregation size, the uses in the courtyard, the buildings added. So it's we've been living 30 plus years with the courtyard as it is. So as some of you may know, and for some of you like Glenn Mann, who was here early in the morning the other night or day, looking at the heavy rains that we had, which are always, I tried to make it, but I didn't make it as early as Glenn. We're concerned about the flooding, and we have had events on the really heavy rains, and you can see in the upper right-hand corner, this is just one of the typical examples that come within 2 foot, 3 foot of the front doors of the office, and it also threatens Reimer Hall doors, and the office is the big problem. So this happens on heavy rains, and the biggest reason, there are several factors. The biggest reason is the elevation of the land and the mulch in the center of the courtyard is much higher. So gravity being what it is, it's accumulating and working backwards. Also, the old drain boxes that collected rainwater from the gutters, and you see them with the concrete collars and the gravel in, they really weren't doing much. And as Glenn discovered when he was digging, they're really not connected. So they're these little pits of gravel, and although they help a little, really wasn't doing much. And it's been particularly limited. It's been particularly limited because of tree roots. We're not sure exactly how much problem that creates, but the roots are very extensive, and that causes dams, if you will, or just difficulty in percolation. The southeast corner of Reimer Hall, of the courtyard, which is right out this door, is of particular concern because over the years, there's been a crack evident. I presume it's one crack, and it's quite noticeable. And as we saw with this recent rain, puddle occurs there, and the water's trying to move downhill into the stormwater pond, but it doesn't make much progress. So that's a worrisome spot. And of course, undermining the foundation of Reimer Hall is the big concern, and that could be probably causing the crack. So we really need to develop a new plan to have successful drainage. There are mobility concerns related to the elevation of the mulch, of the unevenness of the mulch. And the tree roots have complicated this because underneath the mulch, the roots have grown and caused new problems. So it's very difficult for those of us that are able-bodied to maneuver, and those that are a bit challenged. It's not easy, and it's a great concern. The far left image, you can see the amount of difference of the sinking of the bricks, which has seemed to have sunk, but also it's because the old crepe myrtle roots have lifted it as well. You can see how the bricks have become uneven. They're a trip hazard, and the maple tree roots have a great deal of surface structural roots. So we're quite concerned about it. And the laurel oak, although we're not walking so much immediately near it, but around the laurel oak is over 12 inches of elevation difference. And that's a concern. So this is a concern for our users, and it's a liability risk that we should be very attentive to. So looking at the trees, and Eric has been especially helpful in assessing them. The trees are older, nearing, as best as we can tell, their mature age. They've impacted the drainage, they've uplifted walk, and that challenges, as we've talked about. The maple particularly, as we looked around for potential for digging or exploring drainage, the roots are everywhere. The laurel oak had a large branch as of a couple of years. It's been removed now, but it hovered directly over the sanctuary, and that was a concern. But even still, the age of the tree and the notorious concerns about laurels, which are hard to tell whether they're rotten in the core and all, we're worried about that as well for the sanctuary itself. The dogwood is in poor shape. That's the leaning tree. It's really reached about its prime. And the crepe myrtle has been removed. You probably have noticed that, or if not, it's gone as of about a month or so ago. Accessibility is a concern. The courtyard itself, there are mobility issues, as I've mentioned, due to the uneven mulch. The benches, seat heights will vary. And if anyone is attentive to the issues of public parks, there are specific heights that we must maintain. So some people would have an easy time. Other people would struggle to get higher or lower. Getting up and down can be a challenge. The wood benches need to be maintained, and there's been a really nice job of staining them, and that's made a big difference. But as you know, and you could see the warping that takes place. So there's a greater attention to maintenance that will need to take place if we continue to use them. And the last thing is that the picnic tabletops do not provide accessibility for anyone in a wheelchair. And as you may know, there needs to be an extension or a cantilever top so that the wheelchair can roll in and they can have their lunch or whatever, or just have their cup of coffee. And of course, they need to be mobile wheeling, and they can't wheel very easily in the mulch. So we need to be attentive to these things. So we're contemplating, and we will be making final recommendations, several actions that we think are appropriate. The drainage, we really need to lower the mulch. In some cases, it's not too far down, a couple of inches. In other cases, it's going to be 8 to 12 inches, depending upon the tree. In that way, we'll have the ability to drain positively to a more central location. We think that a good solution would be a perimeter trench drain, and essentially that's a narrow trench at a given depth. You buy them according to the volume you need to move. They have a metal top. You can access it, so you undo a couple of screws. You can remove any clogging, and that would move around the perimeter out to the stormwater pond off the corner here at Reimer Hall. And this would be at least the key parts of a drainage plan, and there may be others. There's a thought that perhaps garden drains need to be in the center of the areas that we now call mulch, and that would be a way of collecting more efficiently. So the trees are the challenge, and it's something we take very seriously. The laurel oaks branch has been removed. We need to lower the areas. I'm sorry, this was supposed to be all at once. So the laurel oak we've talked about, that's really a necessity. The other challenge that there is the larger the trees get, the more and more difficult it is to remove them. As it is now, we expect that we will need a crane to move in and lift out the large chunks. It's just going to be it's a challenge and an expense. The maple has extensive roots, and if you pay a little bit of attention, you'll see it's just compacted and it's hard to really even move them. Certainly when we remove roots, it's going to affect the health and probably cause one to eliminate the tree. And that is a serious but necessity that we really need to look at. The dogwood we think should be removed. It's really at its age. So what we're implying, obviously, is we could start over in the center of the courtyard, get it down to an appropriate level, employ drainage that will work, and then from that point, have a configuration, a design, a modified one of what we have, something totally new. It's really going to be dependent upon the vision that everyone wishes to share. And this would give us a chance to have a design for the courtyard for the next future years. No. There's a caveat or a footnote I wanted to mention. There's a footnote I wanted to show to everyone. We've made at least a visual assessment looking at where our shade comes from and imagining if we did remove those trees. And there's a surprising amount of shade from the trees that are on the south side of our canopy. And so it's a scary thought to consider removing trees, but by the same token, it will not be barren. It will obviously be noticeable. Accessibility, yeah, we've talked about that. No, we can go ahead and do it, but we're doing this. I'm going to give you this.
Oh, because of this. Tony.
So this is Sally Simonis, and I have a question about the trees. I have great concern about the shade, as I'm sure many of us do, because without shade in the courtyard, it will be much less useful, frankly, here, particularly since we have so much warm weather. So I know that even if a stump is ground down, you know, would we be able to replant trees in the courtyard in any fashion? I know we have the small, those are hollies, I believe, out there, right? The three, yes. The Palatkos, are they East Palatka hollies or what are they? Yeah, I think so. And they will get larger, but will we be able to plant any other trees if we remove those?
Sally, those are obviously things we've thought a lot about. The answer is we do it now or we do it later is the easy answer. The other answer is we can plant whatever we feel is appropriate. For example, we could plant large trees. We could plant large trees that would be brought in by crane and have 25-foot trees at a cost. And certainly we could do that. The question may be, what's the pleasure of the congregation and how much we would spend. There are also some things at the very end in a few minutes of ideas about shade. But we thought about partial digging up, dig up a quarter or a half of the roots so we can lower it. We thought about, can we keep any? I don't know how, I don't know that we can really keep the laurel oak for very long. It's a high risk. The maple is in the same way. We could probably take out a large portion, but I don't know that it would live. And we could do that. We are going to try and make recommendations that we think are prudent, but we certainly are open to dialogue, and we could certainly try something. It's just from our perspective, it's you do it now or you do it later, and it may be more expensive. Liz has another.
If Eric Smith were here, he would tell you that there are trees we can plant there that will not produce those kinds of superficial root systems that buckle sidewalks and that sort of thing. So there are alternatives.
I'm asking about the feasibility of planting immediately following a removal of a tree because of the underground root systems that are in there now. So I'm not saying what tree we should plant or how big it should be, but just will we be able to replant trees in the courtyard and how, in some foreseeable future. Okay, that's fine. And maybe here.
To answer that question, we certainly can be ready. I mean, at the point that we take this action, if the funds are committed, our belief, or at least we haven't talked about in a great deal, my belief is that when we're ready to do something, we have a plan to continue as opposed to let it lie fallow and barren. So the idea would be take the action and have a new and improved plan ready to be implemented. We can plant immediately. What we would have to do, and that's what I'm implying, we would have to remove the root system of the maple, for example, which would be an awful lot of digging. But once that's out, then we would probably reduce some of the level, but we may be carting off earth to get it back down to an acceptable level. But let me move on. There's some other things that we can talk about. The tree action we're concerning. There are tools that we can use to restrict root systems. A lot of cities plant tree boxes with vertical barriers so that they're not causing problems on the brick streets and whatever, and the roots deflect and go down. There are things like that that we can do. So we have difficult choices. We take them seriously. We would want to have a plan. We want that plan to be well shared so that the character and the ultimate arrangement meets as many needs as we can. And we would have costs to the best of our ability, estimated cost, to know what it's likely going to cost. We have to address it. And I think the oak clearly is a perilous one to leave for too long. The maple, when you have the workers in, it is much more prudent and cost effective to do it. And this is the opportunity. We've lived for 30 plus years with this courtyard. This is our chance to plan for the next 30 years. And if we do it, share it, and talk to everyone, hopefully it's the one that everyone embraces. The images upper right, those are examples of trench drains. You can imagine them. They have varying widths, varying volumes. A garden drain is on the far right. We've got some moving stuff, but a garden drain is essentially a small catch basin that could be in the center, accepting that. And the perimeter could be the rainfall that now comes off of the roof, since the gutters aren't there anymore. And it was recommended that we not put them back. That would move the immediate runoff from the roof. On the bottom left, there are really interesting possibilities if we so chose. We can have fabric wings. They could be temporary for letting the trees grow. They could be more permanent, however we choose them to be. The second picture from the left is the UCC church in Charleston that had just redone and put in a new education building. In their courtyard, they have large planters and small trees that grow. So and those we could move if we so, be pretty heavy, but we could do things like that. There are umbrella-like or other kinds of shade. Whatever we do in a hurricane, we will have to disassemble them and put them away. So some of these will have a labor maintenance kind of task, or I shouldn't say burden, it's just an effort. In the far right, we could even build some sort of a shade structure. We're not sure if we should go that far, but it's certainly possible, and it depends on the wishes of the congregation, and to a certain extent the cost. And it was that particular shade structure I was thinking as you were commenting, what are we going to do when it's this hot? We can do these, and they would be cabled to posts, or we could cable to the roof. It depends on how big we use them and how rainfall is caught and moves off, but that's quite possible. Where we go from here, this is the second of the sharing seminar. And we want to hear these kinds of concerns. It came as no surprise to hear the same sort of expressions. The drainage plan we're very committed to doing because it has multiple impacts if we let it go. We then think once we have the drainage plan and that's presented and with an estimate to Board of Business, well, we should then quickly have vision workshops. What sort of uses within reason do we want to have in the courtyard? What appearance should it have? One could say, I want it to be a garden with landscape all over. Well, it certainly can be. Those that want activities might be hindered by the cutting things up. Those that might want lots of space for outdoor services would all have the other effect of having much more open spaces. So there's going to need to be some give and take. And the hope is with these vision workshops, we can find the happy medium that meets everyone's needs and for uses that we might not have thought about. But that also shares with us whether we need more electrical outlets. Do we need speakers? Do we need, what kind of things do we need? Because once it's torn up, we can bury that infrastructure and meet our needs. Sorry about the pagination. We will do our very best to develop cost estimates. As soon as we have a direction in mind, we want to get that to contractors because at that point we can get more definitive numbers. We can do estimates reasonably well, but it's going to take the tradespeople to really come up with the numbers. And as we're all discovering, anybody that's doing renovation on a home, the numbers are elevating. The lag times of contractors getting in is longer and longer. So that's kind of where we are. The idea is the next tasks are to try and start compiling it and doing the drainage plan, and to have a plan that we can then share and say, this is what we recommend. Here are the components and an approximate cost. If that's approved, we can get it to a contractor and get a definitive cost. And if it's good, we can move forward with that. With that drainage plan, we'll know what effects things have in terms of the trees. Carol.
Carol Barron here. I just wanted to mention that we have had the topographical survey done, and we're just waiting for it. And of course, the courtyard drainage is tied into the retention ponds on the south side of the campus. So those are filled up over years. So it's all, any discussion that we have in relation to the courtyard has to be tied into having somewhere for it to drain to. The second thing that I wanted to mention is we have a foundation failure on the south side of Reimer Hall, that the foundation's fallen a ½ an inch, and we've gotten some proposal on underpinning that to stabilize it. And again, retention is part of the problem. The water fills up to the foundation on a severe rain. Glenn and I pretty much have kind of in our minds designed a drainage plan. And then we reached out to Greenhouse Nursery that had done the playground area, and they came up with a preliminary drainage plan based on just eyesight of the courtyard. And we do have some intermediate stages that we can do. We can do a saw cut and drainage through the sidewalk here, and that everything flows to this area here. And if we could get it out of the courtyard, it would keep it off of the Reimer Hall area and most likely the office. The main thing that we need to consider is, are we going with the footprint that we have now? Are we going to keep the sidewalks and keep the fountain? We know the fountain is supported by its own support, and the brick area Mike Myers has worked on over the years and rebuilt it and patched it, and it is a sunken feature. And so that is something that we've always been concerned about making decisions. Are we going to have a stage? Are we going to have the fountain? Are we going to keep the sidewalks? Are we going to provide another sidewalk that is for handicapped accessibility with picnic tables? So we have a lot of questions for the congregation, and which we've thought out pretty extensively, and Glenn has spearheaded.
Carol, I'm glad you mentioned that. If you were interested, as we are, in looking at drainage and walking around, you'll see that our stormwater ponds, it's a series of, I guess I'll call them serpentine, they're narrow ponds. There's one on the side of Reimer Hall, we'll call that the westernmost. There's another one that runs adjacent to the sanctuary. And then there's a bigger one, sort of a dog leg, that's larger, that's on the east side of the sanctuary. That's all a part of the master drainage that was done in 1990. Well, as Carol discovered in a conversation with the engineer, the estimate is we probably have found 12 inches of siltation that does over time, and there's never been any attempt to maintain them periodically. So we have to dig that out, and the estimate was about 12 inches. The connection that's under our main sidewalk as we walk into the courtyard, that needs to be reconnected. It does not appear to flow. And there on the south side of the sanctuary, off the western corner there, I forget what that one little meeting room is, there's a large magnolia that pretty much sits right in the middle of the pond. So over time, these things happen, and this is not unusual. These things we need to take care of and figure out how to solve for the next 35 years, whether we can dig around and have the water meander around and save that tree or not, we don't know. But those are the challenges we're taking very seriously, and we want to try. We don't want to see a tree lost, but we do want safety and protection of our buildings. That would be a much greater cost. We can always replant. So we don't know exactly where we are going right now, but we will put something together soon and we'll be presenting it again. Once that drainage plan is done and presented, we will then want to have dialogue with members, similar meeting like this, hopefully filled with people wanting to share their ideas, or at least, I don't know, maybe we don't want it filled with 400 ideas conflicting. Anyway, we want to have something that everyone is happy with, as opposed to, we don't intend to sit in a corner and do something and not share it. So that's the plan. Liz?
I'm just going to share with you a comment that Tony Miller on Zoom shared. He said, it's scary to leave those trees.
Yeah.
So Liz, was I correct in understanding that you said that Eric said that there are trees that we could plant that would grow to a decent size, decent enough to give significant shade, that would also not in the future have roots that go under the sidewalks? Okay, thank you. Okay, okay.
There are better trees. There's no one perfect tree, because once you find the tree that will not cause problems in the roots, it may not be a satisfactory canopy. It might be upright, not as much shade. The canopy we want has some breadth to it, but it might have root systems. So finding the best choices we can makes sense. We could choose a couple of large trees, perhaps, and not have many others and let the canopy grow. We could choose medium-sized trees and have a few more. And it'll be not dictated, but it will come from where these use areas are and where we can plant to get the shade that we need. And some of these devices we might employ as a temporary measure or as a permanent measure, because we don't have a way of getting a tree to be in the place that we need. So Eric is going to be key in coming up with choices of trees. There's some interesting trees. There's a native, there's a Florida elm that I know is a darn good tree. It tends to grow more vase shaped. There are some other choices, but within each tree, you have issues. Magnolia, beautiful tree, lots of leaves, and it tends to grow close to the ground. So the crepe myrtle was great. Can't plant it too close to sidewalks or it lifts them up. We will be prudent. And if we need to employ some of these devices that deflect the roots to go under as opposed to across the surface, we can do things like that. So.
What discussion and consideration have you given for the shrubbery that's out there? A lot of it is fairly overgrown. That's a question. And a comment I would have, and I know Eric is in this camp, so I would really like to see us emphasize native Florida plantings. So anyway, talk about the shrubbery that's there and what you all have discussed.
The simple response is we haven't gotten into that detail, given the focus on the drainage. The assumption is that not much do we see needing to be saved, or if we do, we can move it to a location and bring it back. But we haven't thought about what the plan arrangement would be. We haven't thought about what the trees replanted would be. So that's the kind of dialogue. And the native plant question is the vision discussions when we can talk about things. The native plants, most of my career as a landscape architect, the native plants are absolutely fabulous. Most of them go dormant. So one of the things, and some of them freely seed. My wonderful coreopsis in my yard, I planted them and I thought they were going to stay in this one place, and they're kind of going whenever they want. And that's okay. But I think some of the questions would be, are we going to have planters, location plantings of doing a certain purpose? And what kind of maintenance will we have? The natives are going to require much less care and will weather a lot of the storms. There are a few ornamentals that I have used over many years. Not a lot, but there are a few that are in my yard that get no irrigation whatsoever, and I don't even bother them. There are a few. So what my suggestion would be, lean on the natives. If you can't find what you need, there are some ornamentals. One of the big challenges is evergreens. If you want an evergreen ground cover, there's really not much of natives to go. Oh, the trail. Okay. Well, natives for sure. And a deciduous or evergreen becomes the choice that one has to have. But I think, not to deflect your question, but that's the kind of information that we would have in the visioning. And I think we would probably organize it in a sequence of, let's talk about uses, and let's talk about maybe shade, and let's talk about the type of choices, so that we can get all of the factors and then choose a plant or tree that meets all of those, and hopefully it's a native.
Back to the shrubbery for a minute. When you were talking, it kind of sounded like taking the shrubbery out as sort of part of lowering, getting the mulch out. So will most of the shrubs that are in there be removed as part of that process? And we'll be starting over.
To keep the sidewalks.
Yeah, I mean, it's fine by me. All that shrubbery can, I could start over with the shrubbery. That wouldn't be an issue, but yeah, so most of the shrubbery will be removed so I think it would be important when you're presenting to kind of make that clear.
That's a good suggestion. Certainly, if you can imagine the necessity of removing the mulch, lowering the grade, dealing with the roots that we pull out may lower the grade for us, or it might be quite a job, and the roots could very well be under shrubs and things. So the effort to try and save much may not be worth it in the long run, unless we have a plan and we know that we have some plants that are worth it. I don't recall it, but that's a very good suggestion. And again, we're into some details we haven't really thought about, but you're right. We need to make it clear what it'll look like under construction.
Right.
And I'd like to say that we're going to salvage all the benches and the tables for reinstallation unless we find this big golden pot of money. And the other thing is the jury's still out about whether or not we have to take out the interior sidewalks. It might be, to get the root systems out for the Laurel, we might have heavy equipment in here and it's going to bust everything up. So we don't really know yet if it's going to be more necessary to remove the sidewalks, to create the yard drains, to create the drainage, to create the removal of the roots so we can replant.
I was trying to refresh my memory with the plants were there. There's some wonderful Kunti that to me would be worth if we can save and put them somewhere. But imagine, let's just say the laurel oak removal. A 90-ton crane would be parked out there lifting over the gentlemen or ladies, maybe for that matter, that are cutting the limbs off. They will be bringing them down. Usually they bring them down here onto some sort of a smaller bobcat or whatever. They put the big chunks in the bobcat. The bobcat maneuvers out, gets it to a dump truck, and they put them in a front end loader, loads it into the truck. So there's vehicles moving even though the crane reaches over, and it's hard to not damage things, not the least of which are the sidewalks. And if you look at the cracks that we have, we've got lots of cracks and damaged sidewalks, so that might be a major effort.
Glenn Mans, I just have a question about, you mentioned the equipment and whatever, and we had that major limb or about a third of the laurel oak taken off that was hanging over the sanctuary. Did they have a crane to take that off? How did they get that out of here?
I can speak to that, I think, because I had a huge gum tree taken out last year, and Tom Workman did it, which is who Eric, I don't know whether he did the limb, but well, and he's got the most amazing machine that will compress, and it looks like a giant bug. It looks like a bug. I've got a photo of it. I'll show it to you. I've got it on my phone. And it, you know, it kind of compresses down, and, you know, and it's not destructive. So he was able to go right over my septic tank, for example, and without damaging anything. And then they go up from there. So rather than lifting over, you know, they bring it down and across. Yeah, I mean, it's really, I was quite impressed. And it's, you know, it compacts down into a relatively small thing. It went right up my driveway and in a fence, through my fence. Opening. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, there's the bug.
What is it? Oh, cool. Oh, well. I would assume if the crane is pivoting, the crane's going to pivot over to the laurel and do the work there, drop it onto this bug or whatever. So there's movement of a machine, a smaller machine that's going back and forth between these two trees. So you can kind of imagine the central path that would be most desirable is running right through that. We may be able to save the hollies so that we barricade out. I mean, there are things that we would try and do, but boy, it'll be quite a challenge. It'll be very interesting, I think, for the kids to watch and enjoy. Yeah. That's good. So I think that your questions are great and important. We're trying to do this in a step-by-step manner so that we're moving without jumping and missing people to be able to talk to us. So next will be the drainage plan. And then once that is firm and the understanding of the impacts are clear, then the discussion of what might this be for our next 30 years of a courtyard. And that I think will take a bit more time because we want to make sure we include everyone and not schedule our discussions for spring break. When I looked at the schedule, that I'm retired faculty, so the last thing I want to think about is more teaching. So I was oblivious, and lo and behold, we are reaching not as many people, but that's okay. We're trying to do the Zoom and we're going to talk as much as we can and share the information. Okay.